All right, so good morning, everyone. I'm very happy to see you all. It's been a long time actually, and I think today is a really special session, and I'm very excited about it. Ludovica, who is a PhD student working between Siemens and the CHUV in Lausanne, will moderate this session. But before, I'd like to thank two organizations who are joining the force, and who are supporting the Journal Club, as you see on the flyer. So the first one is the SFR MBM. It's the French Society for Magnetic Resonance in Biology and Medicine. So please check out their website and register for their next Congress, which will take place in Paris, end of March next year. And the second organization is the SFICV, the French Society for Interventional and Diagnostic Cardiovascular Imaging. Please also check out their website and register for their coming Congress. And this will take place next year in June. So thank you very much to both of you. I remind everyone that this meeting is being recorded and that you can access and enjoy all the previous sessions on the Lyric educational website that you see there. And now I think it's time to hand over the session to Ludovica. Thanks so much, Ludovica.
Thank you, Rania. So I guess we can start with the presentation. I don't know if there is a preference who wants to start, but I guess we can start with the lower field strength and then move to higher ones. So the first speaker is Matthias Stuber. He's a full professor at the University of Lausanne and head also of the Center of Biomedical Imaging. He is a past president of the SMRA and SCMR, also awarded of the prestigious Gold Medal Award in 2021. And he has recently received the FNS R-Equip funding for the acquisition of a new low-field system in the University Hospital in Lausanne. So today's presentation will be about the low-field cardiovascular MR. The floor is yours.
I have to apologize a little bit to the group because this presentation was supposed to be given, I think, back in June. And then there was the internet dropped out at the Lyric, so we couldn't do it. And in the meantime, we had the visit of Dawn Hardy, and part of this presentation is, of course, known to you, and I apologize for that. I mean, there is just not more material than there is, I'm including in this presentation, with small exceptions. All right. Okay, and this is one of the exceptions. You know, if you think I never worked on 70, that's wrong. I did work on 70. It was so difficult to work on 7 Tesla at the time. There were no coils. The SAR was prohibitive. You couldn't do any scout scans. And it was just, it was a big headache. And I think when I'm looking at the 70 presentations nowadays, it's gotten much, much easier. But I think this was one of the very first commercial 70 systems that was available. At the time, it was in Leiden. And so it was a real uphill battle because, you know, for instance, you cannot even run a T2 prep because of the SAR, right? So these images were required without a T2 prep, and try to do scout scans if nothing else works, then perhaps gradient echo, because all the rest is just prohibitive because of SAR. And this coil here was actually built overnight by Nadine Smith, who unfortunately died a couple of years ago. She was the wife of Erissi Andrew Beck. He's also on this paper. And you know, when I visited them and said, well, I would need a coil to do the heart, she went back on her kitchen table. In the next morning, she came with this coil. We plugged it in and it worked, and we didn't have to worry about ethics committee or anything. It's just, you know, put it on the chest of the volunteer. And well, after like 3 hours, we got these images because all the rest didn't work, right? All right, so that's my little dabbling with 70, and clearly it was prohibitive. T2 prep couldn't even be run. But that brings me now to the whole spiel for lower field strength, and this is a map of the world, which you see here, which represents every single pixel is 500,000 people, right? And so the geographical map of this planet is now laid out according to this. And you can clearly see, the biggest blobs are probably China and India, which have the highest populations. And of course, all these people also have a need for medical care, right? So here are the top 10 countries of the world in terms of population in 2020. And you can clearly see, as you saw on the prior map, this is from The Economist, the prior map was from NPR, but it corroborates basically the story that there is a big increase going to be expected in the world's population. And I just looked it up. This presentation, we are at 8 billion. This estimation is rather optimistic. I don't think by 2050, as shown here on this slide, we will be 9.5 billion. It's probably going to be more, so it's probably going to be worse, which means even more people need access to healthcare. Now, when you look at the vendors, how they look upon this and they project the sales, well, clearly, and these are MRI numbers, right? How many units of MRI systems are going to be sold? And of course, this is a projection. I think this was done in 2020 or so. But what you can see here for an MRI vendor, for Siemens, for Philips, for GE, what have you, there will never be a dull moment, right? Because they will keep selling more and more MRI units, more and more service contracts, etc., etc. So there is clearly an increased global need in the delivery of MRI units, no matter what you do, right? However, if you look at the installed base, you can clearly see that, the lower the field strength, the more you have as an installed base, even though in other countries, in the Western countries that are rich, 3T is actually very, very so,
We froze.
I'm back?
Yeah.
No?
Yes.
Oh, yeah. Okay. So what we observe is that we do not only have an increased global need in MRI, but also that the higher field strength, the fewer installed base you have. And I would also say that, if you look at the patients that can benefit from these field strengths, I mean, 70 is a very nice research tool where you can make new scientific findings, both on the technology, but probably also on the physiology or metabolism side. But in reality, it benefits fewer and fewer patients, right? If you think about where is a 70 system installed in a hospital that is used for diagnosis and for patient care, right? So that's probably very, very, very sparse when compared to 1.5 Tesla. So therefore, the hypothesis should be allowed that the market should be expanded actually in the other direction, right, towards low field. So what have we seen so far in this presentation? Higher and higher field strengths probably benefit fewer and fewer patients. The need for MRI systems is clearly growing worldwide and has to do also with the growing population, and over proportionally in regions that have not had traditionally access to MRI, like India or China. And of course, this puts pressure on the price tag of an MRI unit. The Chinese respond to that by creating their own scanners, right? They don't buy it from the Europeans or from the Americans anymore. They make their own scanners. But of course, the big vendors have to react to that. They have to think about that, how they could get the foot in the door there as well. And so guess what? The unmet need is a performant, low-cost MRI unit, right? Now, when I started my PhD, there were already low-field units around. Actually, they've been around for 40 years, of course. And of course, nobody was interested in working on those because there was clearly a signal-to-noise penalty, and I will get to that. So low field units could clearly be the solution. Because why? Because they could be manufactured, installed, operated at about $1 million per Tesla. So that's just a rule of thumb. So I don't know whether that scales with 7 Teslas. Stan can probably talk to us about that, what the expectations are there in terms of costs, as I already mentioned. So the $1 million question is, why is the option low field not being pursued more decisively? If you look at compelling evidence that a lower field unit should be marketed and installed more globally. So these are the reasons why not. The field strength is lower, so as a result of that, the signal-to-noise ratio is compromised. So that also puts pressure on the scanning duration, and of course, time is money. So there you kind of producing lower cost scanners. We're interested in fat saturation. Water and fat are very close together, so that means that you have to spend also more time in suppressing fat than on higher field strength. Concomitantly, we just have witnessed, of course, over the past few decades, a staggering increase even in the velocity of technology development. If you think about MRI, you know, if you've been a PhD student over the past 4 years, computing power, mathematical tools that are being adopted to MRI, and so forth and so forth. It's just, and artificial intelligence, of course, I shouldn't forget. There has been staggering progress that could potentially be harvested for addressing this signal-to-noise penalty at lower field. And here, these items that I was just mentioning are mentioned. What comes to it in addition is that the vendors have now figured out how to make pneumatics, like superconductors with zero boil-off, larger bores, which makes a design of course. The RF chains have been redesigned. It's all solid state. It's multiple channels. It's multiple coils. All things that are beneficial for the signal-to-noise ratio on the technical side, just from the MRI scanner itself. And then we have new time-efficient MRI methods like fingerprinting, multitasking, and also free running, which collects a lot of information per unit time, which we didn't have, in the past. So there is another element that comes to what I just showed you before. It's also technical opportunity, right? And in its broader sense, the computing power, new methods, but also the vendors who are now better equipped to produce these systems. So the hypothesis is allowed, of course, that all these advances will balance the disadvantages that were traditionally available on lower field. So there is, however, also reason for optimism. If you look at this slide here, if you think about opportunities, one that I feel is very interesting is the T2 star. That's increasing. So that's a good thing, right? Because the signal decays less rapidly. That means, ultra short echo time techniques or spiral or EPI techniques will over proportionally benefit from this. And also because the field homogeneity is going down, so that also you can sample the data in a highly efficient way. So while the signal is not decaying so rapidly, so just by the sheer fact of this, you will regain some of the SNR back. Then, of course, you have a lower B1 inhomogeneity. The SAR goes down. I showed you at 70. 70 is prohibitive for T2 prep, at least in my experience. If you go to lower and lower field strength, of course, this is becoming less and less of a problem. You can run BSSFP sequences with high flip angles and also lower bandwidth because of you have, it's just reduced P0 in homogeneity, so lots of opportunities. T1 and T2, they don't change that much. Acoustic noise and magnetic force, you don't care that much, I would say. Magnetic force is interesting for those who want to do interventional, where devices are being used, that experienced torque while manipulating it. So that's why a couple of centers are now buying this, and one of our colleagues for neurointervention just submitted an SNF grant where he wants to investigate such devices on our low field system. Then it's going to be very interesting for ferromoxitol because the relaxivity of that contrast agent is going to benefit twofold when compared to 1.5T. And of course, the cost is lower, sighting is easier, the magnets are lighter, there is no quench line anymore. So that means that all of a sudden there is an opportunity to put that system in places where no MRI systems were before, both geographically, as I mentioned, but also locally in the hospital. We cannot put these things at places, where you don't need a quench line. It's complicated to get out of the hospital. You can basically put it anywhere where there's floors and have tons of it. So this was announced at the RSNA. Doesn't need any helium anymore, as mentioned. No quench line, right? That significantly reduces the installation costs. It's large bore, which is also good for obesity pandemic we are all enjoying. Then simultaneously the table accommodates 320 kilograms. Personally, I don't care, but this is a selling point for these systems. And yes, the system is much lighter. If you think about it, Prisma, it's about 13 tons, and this baby here comes at 3 tons. It's also equipped with a higher-end computing unit, which makes the use of artificial intelligence and possibly also contrast sensing more directly applicable. And then it comes to the tune of below $1 million, 2.5 million for Prisma. And these are prices in Switzerland. And then 0.9 million, I have to add, this would be the high-end unit of this Freemax system. There are also different flavors of that system, which are going to be less costly. So these systems, again, cost to purchase them is lower, the installation costs are lower, the maintenance costs are lower, therefore the maintenance contracts, which hit you every year, right? So this is one of the revenue streams of the Henderson system. And finally, because you don't have to have any helium refill, and operating costs are also going to be reduced. So now we have like 4 different reasons why a low field unit is actually a good idea.
Can I ask a question? Just in
Sure.
Yes.
Very good, by the way.
I heard you.
Do you know what is this lower? I mean, is the price lower just only because of the production? I mean, the materials, the production itself, or it is also, for example, the software, because I do not say just software, but they try to invest, they use just more standard software, they do not need to invest in that, or do you know what is the difference or not?
I think this is a difficult argument to make, because if that were true, that if the companies could build on prior knowledge, right, then why are we paying $3 million for a 3T system? Because the technology has been developed, there is no development anymore that's going on. So moving forward, they should be becoming cheaper and cheaper, and they don't. Right? When I was young, I learned that the price of an MRI system is mostly driven by the magnet, and that price is driven by the meters of the superconducting wire.
Exactly. That is at the same that I knew.
So that's what I heard. If you talk to the vendors nowadays, they tell you that's no longer true. Now, I don't know exactly where we are in that spectrum, but Siemens is selling this cheaper than a 1.5D and a 3T system. They are not in it for altruistic money, like they have shareholders to take care of. So I'm thinking they are making money with these systems, and so they must be able to produce them at a lower price, even though there are some elements in there that are more costly, like a magnet that has zero boil-off, for instance, higher-end computing unit. These are all things that are more expensive. So it would be very interesting to learn more about the price breakdown. How is it possible to market those at a lower price? I think it's a complicated combination.
I imagine that they would use something more than
no. I can just hypothesize. I can just use historic knowledge, and maybe this is not even true. But at the end of the day, it's cheaper, and Siemens certainly is making money with them. So somewhere there must be.
In the sense that we knew, I knew it because that, of course, mostly the price was more or less linear with the field strength.
Yeah.
Of course, I imagine that going lower. I mean, as you said, the main, but some basic costs that not. But I would consider this field, this MR, I mean, not so. Compared to the one that
It's 0.9 million, right? And also clearly for such large cores, making gradients that are performant and linear is of course an added challenge. So that's probably one of these. So then there is another element, and this is the ease of use, and I would like to mention that. Because if you have now it's affordable on the left-hand side of that bridge, but then if you deploy this at geographical regions where there is no operator expertise, this is a real gap, right? So you cannot expect to have the Jean-Baptistes all over the planet, right? There is only one, and there is the one and only, and he is here. He's one of our champions of the technology. Like a single team, I don't expect to have that broad expertise available. Right? Where should they have the expertise from? So to fill that gap, you could either strive to educate people in a more intensive way, which is going to be difficult again because these systems are not there. On the other hand, in order to address this, you could also make easy to use affordable technology, right? If you do that, then you could successfully bridge this gap as well. And I think this is a smarter approach than trying to focus on the education. And I really think that you could put, the CIB EU stamp on this to make this easier to more successfully disseminate this technology. Oh, bonjour, Ruud. Oh, he's in the salle d'attente. Okay. Nice to have you next door too, Ruud. Anyway, all right. So now we have 5 advantages.
I think the freeze.
Huh?
I saw the screen freeze, so maybe I don't know if they view it that way.
How it works. Okay, now we have 5 benefits, right? If you will, on top of all this, and of course, that's where we come in, right? Because we can, with our free-running web framework related ideas, we can make it to people who have never even done an MRI scan before, because they only have to push a button and out come the images. And of course, you know me, right? When I saw all these opportunities, I was thinking, oh, great, let's write a grant. But for a grant, you need preliminary data. And I'm really sorry. I thought, oh yeah, I have some of these pictures that Sharon was showing, except for the injection with the contrast agent. And I'm a little bit bummed that I don't have that nice image. But nevertheless, that was during the pandemic. We were supposed to travel to Erlangen, which we couldn't because of COVID, to work on that low field system. Then I decided on short notice to go on vacation. You see me on the lower right corner there in my hotel room on vacation, whereas Toby was already in Germany. He could travel, and he went to Erlangen to help with this scan. And Toby is a brave person, right? And he could pull it off. So that means the proof is in the pudding, right? A brave person, it's really easy. Okay? Of course, I'm over-exaggerating, that. And so the first image you saw, they were kind of serious, right? Because I think there were some installation issues and the release didn't work. I don't know what it was anyways, but all of a sudden things started clearing up. The first phantom image popped up. So then the running framework. Now I think
maybe a solution could be that you can use the mic of your computer,
Yes.
and I get the mic here.
Yes.
It's a bit late maybe, but
you think it's a mic issue?
No, I think it's.
no, it's just that
computer.
it's a connection issue of this computer probably, and
Yeah, but how does the mic change anything?
because then you connect it to the Wi-Fi, right? And maybe your connection is more stable. Yes.
Was that
Interesting.
babies we saw behind Davide on the picture? They were like dolls behind Davide, if anybody noticed that.
I didn't see.
This is tough to follow. I'm sorry, everyone. They have a very bad network in Lausanne.
Can you hear me?
Yes,
You're
that's
all
we can.
frozen.
actually better.
Can you try increasing the speaker on your computer?
Increasing the speaker.
Putting sound on your
I think that's fine. It's a very
There is sound on my computer.
Matthias,
Oh,
it's all
no.
good.
yeah, yeah.
Okay. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Man, all right. Okay, so anyway, this is the sequence we're using, and I don't know for how long you were frozen. Maybe I was just talking to myself forever, but Huh? You're right here, and you're even paying attention. Awesome. Okay, so this worked right out of the box. As you can see with these first images, they really suck, right? These are bad images, as kind of expected. But then with the magic of harvesting new knowledge, new computer power, Jerome's reconstruction, it was just amazing how they got cleared up. And then, of course, we also had Aurelien's tools as a benefit. Can you hear me, guys?
Yes, very well.
All right. So, and then we also had Aurelien's, patch-based low-rank denoising, which was thrown into the pot, and then all of a sudden you kind of get back the image quality you need. And this just goes to show, what I said in the beginning, that new tools, new hardware, new software, etc., can actually compensate for the loss in signal-to-noise. And I think the proof is in the pudding. And there we are. We had the preliminary data that were needed for a grant application. Am I frozen again?
Oh, good.
Matthias, all good.
So
Keep going. It's all fine.
Okay, all right. So that is not good. What I see on my screen is okay, all right. So I wrote a grant, which was entitled Low-Field MRI, the Next Frontier, right? And so if you look at this, we had, I think, in total 13 co-applicants, which is a lot, which spans, the bandwidth from engineering to clinical studies. And so a half year later, we got the results back, and we were awarded 630,000 Swiss francs with the message that the vendor should lower the price by 10%. Okay.
But it's not sufficient.
Yeah, that, interesting, right? I've never seen something like that. So this is the band. This is a term coined by Tobias Kober. So everybody on this slide contributed with text to this grant, which then I somehow had to homogenize and put into a form where it's coherent. So that was an interesting exercise, but as it was during COVID, I had time to do this. And, then they also wrote me something else, namely that this application was assigned to the highest level. And in the meantime, I became part of the RECIP judging panel after I wrote this grant. And I just realized there was none of the grants we just looked at was assigned to the highest level. So that means something. That means they really appreciated, you know, the quality that's coming out because of this conglomerate of people from different walks of life, translational, medical professionals, engineers, etc., that they put their heads together to work on low field. And the grant is basically centered around two aims. The first aim is purely technical, addressing SNR issues, FATSAT issues, ease of use issues, whereas the second aim is then using this technology for lungs, for congenital heart disease, neuro, new biomarkers, etc., etc. I'm not bothering you with that in the interest of time. 630 I already mentioned. And how is this baby going to be financed? Well, half of the money is coming from the Swiss National Science Foundation, and then the other half is split between Juvenile on the one hand and the CIBM on the other hand. So there is money coming from different pots that pays for that system, and also for the installation of it. Of course, the room has to be made ready. And this should be a resource for all interested investigators in the region. It's going to be housed at the CHUV in radiology. And what's also cool is it will allow us to do reference standard comparisons, right? We can compare our results to 1.5T or to 3T, and the clinicians then can identify to what extent low field can be used to, you know, in order to make the diagnosis they are intended to do. The access, the billing, and support provided by the CIBM is copy pasta from the 3T Prisma. It's the same exact thing. It will be totally transparent, no difference when compared to the other systems, with the only exception that this system here is going to be a pure research system. So this is frozen again. So here is the system going to go in this building close to the parking garage. If you drill down virtually to the 5th floor, on the 5th floor, there will be a corridor which goes right over to the new children's hospital that is being built there in the background. And this is the layout, how it looks. You see here a stamp of the CHUV, I think with the signature of Alban Denis, the head of radiology, to basically show that we are okay with the arrangement of the room. So this will be the system here. The parking garage is back here, so it's far enough away from the cars. Then we have two desks. So yay, we got 2 desks more. If the group is getting too big, so no, it's I think it's a well-designed structure. Even the toilet is close by. This will be, you know, there will be a Faraday shield will be needed, etc. And this is the timeline of the system being installed. And, you know, I'm a bit bummed, of course, you know, when we got that thing funded on the one hand and how long it now takes for it to be installed on the other hand. But I also have to say, there was nothing but support from the CHUV, even though it takes longer. It had to do with the structural integrity of the place where it was first planned to be installed. So it takes longer. Yes?
I was asking if you have seen.
Okay.
But I have when do they need the final pitch?
When?
Yes.
I think it's 8 o'clock in the morning. No, I don't know.
I would like to see.
Yeah, you are most welcome to go there and
I would like to
exactly. So it's of course fascinating to witness how a new MRI system is being put in, right? There are so many aspects you don't even think about. So for instance, how do you move 3 tons into the hospital over the floors, which are not designed to hold that weight, and yet they do it, right? And there are ways to do it, obviously, because otherwise there would be holes everywhere where there was an MRI system. Okay, so with that, I come to my conclusion, and I would really also again take the opportunity and thank all those of the CHUV and also the CIBM leadership who were very supportive, who put signatures on everything I put in front of them, be it money, be it approval, be it whatever. They were just wonderful how they supported this endeavor, and they are clearly not responsible for the delay. And with that, I would like to thank you all for your attention.
I have a quick question, if I may. Will that machine be dedicated to cardiac MRI, or would there be other applications as well?
Matthias, you are muted.
I think it's better if they cut their videos. It will go faster.
For us?
But I don't think the audience cut the video. I think we should just keep.
No, but it's just a problem of the computer. Huh? Even here, we cannot connect to internet that easily. Sometimes.
So, what's the problem?
So let's get the microphone and the speaker on your computer. Because now, yeah, it's talking with, and nobody is hearing. No keys.
Okay, we didn't get the answer, or did I miss it?
Right. You're back. Can you hear us?
Yes.
You know, I hope Lowfield is going to work better than Zoom.
It's for sure it will be. Okay. Should I take the floor, or we had?
We can also move forward, and then we can ask all questions at the end, since I guess there will be common questions related to both presentations. Thank you, Matthias, for the presentation. It was really interesting.
Do you see my screen, full screen?
Yes.
Yeah, perfect. So I'll try to advocate in my turn high field MRI, cardiac MRI. I'd like to thank Oriana first for inviting me for this journal club. It's a very interesting discussion we should have between low and high field. And I'll try to advocate for 3 Tesla as a high field. I'll talk a little bit about 70, but as Matthias presented, it's a challenging application for 7 Tesla to work on cardiac MRI. So as disclosure, I have to say that I've worked at many fields from 0.35, so even lower field, to 7 Tesla, although they were only Siemens. And although I've changed fields, I still like 3 Tesla best. I have a very physicist point of view, so please spare me if I have a biased point of view. But I'll try to explain a little bit why I'm excited when I work at 3 Tesla more than any other field. So let's go back to what Matthias said, the availability of MRI for cardiac MRI. So indeed, there's a population that is missing the opportunity to access MRI. But when you consider the existing park of MRI scanners in the Western countries, so North America here, but it's also the case in Europe, about 1/3 of the park of MRI scanners or 3 Tesla MRI scanner here in green. So it's a lot of MRI scanners that are especially embedded in cardiac, so university, hospital, that are cardiac centers, and they're more likely to be equipped with 3 Tesla. So in my opinion, there's a clear opportunity for 3 Tesla cardiac MRI, and considering the value of cardiac MRI in the care of patients, it's interesting to consider that opportunity. All vendors provide high-end 3 Tesla MRI scanners now. That ranges from 60 to 75 wide, so it accommodates for bigger patients. I think the bigger is the United Systems. It's the Chinese system, actually, that is on the right. But there's Philips, GE, Siemens, and Canon as well. And the usage is transparent. I think one of the key things is, like Matthias said, is to use the scanner seamlessly. And the 3 Tesla or 1.5 are almost the same. If you don't tell the technologists, they don't really notice which scanner they're using. The full routine cardiac MRI can be performed easily at 3 Tesla with minimal adaptation from the core acquisitions. And I would point out that the core acquisitions include CINI, BSSFP CINI, flow, T1 and T2 mapping, perfusion, and most importantly, late gadolinium enhancement. All of that can be performed at 3 Tesla. So cardiac MRI are complete at 3 Tesla. Yes, sorry, I'm skipping that. CINI used to be penalized. There's this long-standing misconception that BSSFP CINI used to be penalized at 3 Tesla, mostly due to B0 inhomogeneity. But that has dramatically improved over the past decade. There's this interesting paper that compared the B0 homogeneity of different systems. Unsurprisingly, the winning system has been the Prisma, which is the most homogeneous system available on 1.5 and 3 Tesla. But when you compare the field homogeneity within a spherical volume of 40 centimeters, it stands within 1 ppm, so within 120 hertz. You stay within that limit, so banding artifacts are reasonable and solvable within that range at 3 Tesla. So really, CINI can be performed without much bending artifacts. And if there is still bending artifacts, shimming is also available. It's now no longer the DES sequence that is used for shimming in cardiac applications, but more the GRE triggered dual echo sequence, which is more suited for cardiac shimming. So that has also helped for 3 Tesla. There's also faster gradients and improved partial echo reconstruction that have allowed for reduced minimum TR. So it allows for pushing further away the bands in BSSFP. And any residual bending can be solved with a rapid frequency scout. All technologists are very familiar with this extra step. Another point is the dual transmit channels in the transmit channel of many 3 Tesla systems, which help to level signal homogeneity. So there's no longer like a bright spot in one part of the body, but it's more homogeneous. And interestingly, the contrast is also sharper at 3 Tesla. If you ask clinicians, they really like CINIs at 3 Tesla. And that old paper from 2006 proved that both Flash and BSSFP CINI improved from going from 1.5 to 3 Tesla, both in SNR and in CNR. And the reason is because of the blood that is also brighter in 3 Tesla. So fresh blood coming in 2D CINI. And you get a 20% boost of CNR. You can appreciate these images here are both the Flash and no, it's actually 1.5 and 3 Tesla CINI with the 3 Tesla on the top. One thing we appreciate in our center in Marseille from that sharper contrast is for non-compaction, as seen on the right, where you can see the trabeculations in the left ventricle here. So you get a boost in CNR and in SNR. And that boost in SNR can be transferred into higher acceleration, which can in return give more resolution, so higher resolution. In turns, it helps to facilitate strain measures such as feature tracking, and in our case, it improves non-compaction as well to visualize non-compaction. So there's multiple benefits of working with 3 Tesla just for the routine exam. Another part is the flow. We like to do our 4D flow at 3 Tesla as well because of the higher SNR. So you get a little bit more acceleration at 3 Tesla, and it still fits within 10 minutes. The 4D flow can be fit better in 3 Tesla than it is at 1.5. T1 mapping also benefits from a higher resolution. Look at ECV maps, for example. It's very much appreciated to look at higher resolution throughout the myocardium. The fusion can be performed to look at ischemia and later enhancement with higher resolution. But most importantly, I would say late gadolinium enhancement is really interesting to perform at 3 Tesla. And I know Ariane would be sensitive to that, but we really like to see sharper scars, but also their features, their granulosity is important, and that can be achieved at 3 Tesla a little bit better, in my opinion. In a recent study we performed, we saw that the position and the feature of LGE was differentiated between myocarditis from immunology, induced by immunology, and myocarditis, viral myocarditis. And so LGE was the really key separation between these two populations of patients that had myocarditis. And it was important to look at septal mid-wall LGE that is really thin sometimes and that you can only see with a higher resolution LGE. So working at 3 Tesla can help for distinguishing these patients. So as a practical conclusion, I would say cardiac MRI can be performed seamlessly at 3 Tesla, and it boosts a little bit the resolution at Tesla as well. So other benefits can be expected, speed or contrast, but overall, in the global overview, I would say conventional cardiac MRI are very interesting at 3 Tesla. From a technical point of view, I think it's interesting to see that the challenges that were passed at 3 Tesla have improved also the global hardware development in that also can benefit lower field, even very low field. There are stronger gradients that are available, up to 80 millitesla per meter, which gives faster sequence, but they are also quieter. They've improved not only the gradients, but the casing of the gradients. So if you use these gradients below their maximum, they're usually quieter. So if you ask patients, they appreciate to work at 3 Tesla, to be scanned at 3 Tesla, because the gradients are a little bit better protected for mechanic resonance. There's also improved shimming, like we saw. There's now a cardiac dedicated shimming sequence that helps this, and it can also benefit lower field strength. There's also automated shimming that is upcoming with, of course, artificial intelligence, where you can target the heart and automatically shim for the heart, which helps any field, actually. There's also improved triggering. I know you guys are keen on free running, but if you do ECG, there's 4 points now. There used to be 3. There's also smarter ECG, such as this work from Nancy, from the group in Nancy, where they use it's a complex system that probes the gradients and uses the gradients to correct for the ECG and have a smarter ECG, I would say, that doesn't have any interference with the MRI system. There's the pilot, of course, that is a very interesting and promising development for no ECG triggering and self-navigation, of course. But I'm not the best person to talk to you about this. Another part that is interesting is the improvement in RF pulses. There's better B1 plus resistant adiabatic RF pulses, especially leveraging the common two channels PTX systems, that we can go up to 8 channels on certain 3 Tesla systems. And it helps to have either specially resolved saturation pulses, such as this presentation here, or spectrally selective RF pulses, such as seen on the right, where you suppress that, you have a fat sat and a T2 prep to visualize the coronary, so you suppress the fat here a bit better. So all of that has been worked at 3T, and it benefits other fields as well. Now, from a research point of view, because I'm a researcher, I'm mostly excited about 3 Tesla for research, so I'll digress a bit from routine and conventional cardiac MRI. There's a benefit to work at 3 Tesla is that you can explore a lot of novel contrasts. So the first is arterial speed enabling. I'm lucky to work with the group in Delft from Sebastian Weingartner to work on ASL in the heart, which benefits from the longer T1 at 3 Tesla and a higher SNR. And we've shown that with this sequence, we can get accurate and reliable perfusion maps without any contrast at 3 Tesla. And it's a promising work. Then it would be difficult actually to do at 1.5. There's cardiac diffusion as well. It's a promising contrast that is getting more and more attention to look at the microstructure of the myocardium. And you can see from these maps that with the push button, it's a very interesting sequence provided by Kevin Moulin that is really push button, and you can get, with the stronger gradients and with the higher resolution, beautiful maps of diffusion in the myocardium. While free breathing has slice tracking, it has many features, and it really benefits to be at 3 Tesla to get these maps of myofiber orientation, helix angle in the middle, mean diffusivity in the left, and fractional isotropy in the center. Another aspect that I like, although it's less popular, is spectroscopy. It really helps to be at 3 Tesla to have an improved spectral resolution. So the peaks are more spread out and you have a higher SNR. And in a 1 minute scan, you can get a nice spectrum. It's not an image, but it's a spectrum of the myocardium here. And you can differentiate the different lipids here in the septum, but also the creatine at 3 ppm and potentially the small fatty acids that are seen at around 2 ppm. So it helps to be at 3 Tesla to spread out the spectrum and have a higher SNR to get this spectroscopy. One last thing that I like at 3 Tesla, you all know that I'm keen on cardiac fats. So you have a faster phase accrual at 3 Tesla. So it helps to increase the sensitivity to fat spectra. So that's a little bit harder to be sensitive to different fat spectrum at 1.5, but it's easier at 3 Tesla. You get a higher resolution as well for looking at epicardial fats. So it helps to be at 3 Tesla, as we've seen together on this collaboration. It helps to have eventually cardiac resolved fat fraction and R2 star maps in the heart. One last contrast that I'm excited about is QSM, so quantitative sensitivity map. Working in the higher field, you get more sensitivity to susceptibility. And so this interesting paper that is recent from Pennsylvania showed that with QSM in the hearts, you can get a higher sensitivity to either iron or oxygen. And in the case of iron, you can see the reperfusion injury in these hearts in vivo between here a reperfusion injury and a microvascular obstruction on top and no injury at the bottom. And that can be clearly seen both in LGE, but also in QSM. Last, but maybe not least, because it takes time, X nuclei is a very important aspect to work in research at higher field. So 3 Tesla and even higher at 7 Tesla, there are benefits to work at these fields for sodium, seen on the left, phosphorus in the middle, where you see the spectrum differentiating between phosphokeratin and ATP. So that's at 3 Tesla, but if you go at 7 Tesla, it's even better. And also fluorine, there's this beautiful study in pigs at 3 Tesla working on macrophages imaging with fluorine that is very promising. Also, carbon-13 is of interest at 3 Tesla. So all of this is research aspects. They don't have any place in routine exams, but they're very interesting to better understand cardiomyopathies and the physiology behind all the pathologies we study. So as a conclusion, I would say practically clinical exams are complete. They can be expected to perform both at 1.5 or 3 Tesla seamlessly. Interestingly, many features have eased 3 Tesla and benefit other fields as well. And I would say 3 Tesla is the research ally we need. It's a rich substrate with many advantages, in my opinion, for working on research perspective. Of course, and like presented before, high field MR has limitations as well. It has limited access for populations, but also for some patients with metal artifacts, implants. That's a little bit harder to work with on these patients at 3 Tesla. So there has to be an acknowledged as well. And that's it. Thank you all for your attention.
Thank you, Stan.
So are there any questions from the audience?
Okay, I think you can hear us well.
Yes.
Okay. So the wire was not correctly connected.
Which wire?
This one. And now it's back on.
Do you guys have any questions for Stan?
Yeah, a very simple question. You showed some VSSFP CNM.
Yeah.
Is it 3D CNM or 2D CNM?
It's 2D. Actually, in 3D it's harder. Yeah, it's 2D.
The microphone, okay. So it's a slightly selective VSSFP, may that be?
Yeah, if you use 3D, actually you don't benefit at 3 Tesla because of the prolonged T1. So you actually, you're better off at 1.5 in 3D.
So Stan, I'm interested in your enthusiasm about 3D, because if I take all our students and we sprinkle them over all the field strengths, guess what? They all land at 1.5 Tesla.
I know,
right?
I know.
And the workhorse, of course, for us, the free running sequence is VSSFP. So there must be some difference, and I agree with you. I think the homogeneous range you showed is 40 centimeters or something. No, I don't remember how much it was. But I think what also kills us is outside of this homogeneous region, it's so inhomogeneous that it perturbs the spins that are flowing into the field of view, and then you have lots of flow artifacts. You know, it's not only what meets the eye in the center where it's super nice and homogeneous, it's also all the crap that happens outside of this region that hurts us in a way in VSSFP. And maybe, thanks to 2D, this is less likely to happen. I don't know.
Yes, and yeah, it's less likely to happen. 2D has other benefits as well. For sure, it's slower if you look at 3D compared to 3D, but you can accelerate it with compressed sensing now, with simultaneous multi-slice as well. So there are pros and cons for both. I would say for 3D, I think GRE is the way to go for 3 Tesla. It's VSSFP at 3 Tesla in 3D. It's challenging, which I understand.
It is what? VSSFP at 3 Tesla?
It's challenging.
Because the 2D acquisition is triggered, is ECG triggered?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Sorry for my ignorance in acquisition.
No.
No, I ignore everything, and I'm happy that.
No, these are good questions. It's I think for 2D, it's the same. The 1.5 or 3 Tesla, it's about the same. I like 2D SSFP, but I can understand that some people prefer 1.5. It's even easier. You don't have, most of the time you don't do frequency scout. You can skip that step, which you probably need most of the time at 3 Tesla. But for the free running, it's a different application.
And what about the diffusion that you showed?
Yeah,
they were really nice. Was it in 2D as well?
Yes, it's all 2D. It's a sequence that is provided by Kevin Moulin.
Mm-hmm.
It's a pretty push button sequence, and you get nice 2D maps. You can do that in multiple slices if you want to do the whole heart. It takes a little bit of time then.
Mm-hmm.
Most of the time people do 1 or 2 slices.
Okay.
Just like T1 map, right? So base, mid, and portion map.
Mm-hmm.
But it's interesting to see the evolution of diffusion MRI. It started about, I think the first publication was 2002, and then there was a gap because the technology was not there. Mm-hmm. And in 2010 it restarted to come back, and now it has really improved, and it's eased its utilization in routine.
Okay.
I think there's work from Lausanne as well on diffusion.
I'm working on it. I'm trying.
So you mentioned
Go ahead.
So you mentioned the limitation related to implants, and this is definitely a stronger point for lower field strength. Do you think that in the future, like cross modalities across field strength imaging would be the solution for this? So you would get the high information about the morphology in a higher field strength, and then you combine this with an imaging that doesn't, like, it would give you more overall anatomical information on a lower field strength, or something like this.
Yes, it's a very good perspective. I think the value of cardiac MRI has to be included in the consideration. So if the value is really high to get high resolution or very sensitive scans on a patient, then they can go to 3 Tesla. Even if they have implants, they might then still see the portion that you're interested in the heart. But as a pre-exam, maybe you could go to lower field strength, right, which is more available, and just as a second step, go to 3 Tesla. It really depends on the value. It's the same, lower field strength. It's not clear yet what is the value in cardiac MRI, but if it proves value, then it will be very interesting. It will be more affordable.
I guess also in terms of sequences, there will be new. I mean, Aurélien and the PhD student Pauline work on this wideband technique. So I guess also in terms of developments, there is hope at higher field strength to still see the tissue despite the presence of an implant.
Absolutely, yeah. There's more work for research. It's good for us.
Dan, you seem to be advocating for higher field strength, right? So thinking this further and thinking about 7 Tesla, you were at the retreat this year, and you know, before the pandemic, I think 3 years ago, there was Jeanette Schultz-Menger, who was also at the retreat, and she showed just unbelievable cine short axis images of the heart at 7 Tesla. I think they were great in deco, but still they were just unbelievable in terms of signal to noise. So, you know, you being an advocate for higher field strength, what do you think that the place of 70 would be, and where do you see the sweet spot for cardiac imaging in terms of field strength?
Yeah, it's a question we've been asked many times because we have a 7 Tesla, and I've tried to work on 7 Tesla for the heart. I got a few studies going on, but the value of 7 Tesla for cardiac MRI is unclear. I think you can get cine, but it's a little bit more work, even on gradient angle. You still need to shim, otherwise you have sensitivity artifacts, so the signal drops very rapidly. You have the other issue is the transmission, so you don't see the posterior wall as easily because your B1 is just decreasing rapidly throughout the heart. So you can see, like you've shown in the coronary images, you can see the anterior wall very easily, but the posterior wall and the aorta is difficult to observe in larger patients. You can get thin, like skinny patients, and it will work. But if you consider everybody, then that's a little bit more challenging. I think the value of 7 Tesla is for exemplar. When you're looking at really specific acquisitions that have very high value in sensitivity and specificity, then potentially 7 Tesla for cardiac MRI using exemplary sequences, then there's interest in understanding and differentiating like specific pathologies or understanding the treatment pathways when you're giving like a specific treatment, see how the patient responds to these treatments. That's where 7 Tesla can play a role. But in routine, I don't see how routine 7 Tesla cardiac exam can be imagined in the future.
Sweet spot.
Sorry.
I'm sorry?
Where is the sweet spot?
Where's the sweet spot? That has to be defined. That's where the research has a role to play.
I ask you as an expert, what is your inkling? Is it's probably not 70, it's probably not 0.55 T, but I think that the function between the two field strengths is rather smooth. So where is the optimum?
I think it depends on the application. If you aim for like a very thin scar and you want to differentiate between like the scar's granularity, then higher field strength. But if you want to see hypertrophy, dilatation, or other pathologies that are more microscopic, then lower field strength will have a higher value. But that's a personal opinion. What is your opinion on that?
I really like 1.5 Tesla, and maybe the optimum is at 1.73. Who knows? But I think it's around there.
I think it's good to have all of these options, and then we'll see how they develop.
Just hassle-free, you know.
Yeah. Yeah, the hassle-free cardiac exam is very interesting. If you can do a push-button cardiac exam, it will help a lot.
I have a comment, not a question, because for me, 3 Tesla, it's a low field, but because I'm working a very high field. You know, it always depends on what you want to study, what you want to do. If you want to develop a robust MR clinical exam, of course, to work on lower field is better because it's very easy. You don't have a lot of disadvantages of inhomogeneities of B1, of B0, etc. But if you want to develop some more fundamental research with very high resolution, I'm talking in my case, you have to work on higher field. And you have, of course, a lot of drawback. But what is very interesting is that the MR community is very active and you have to interact with a lot of people to develop a lot of stuff. So it really, really depends on what you want and the application of your research, of course.
I have a question for the low field strength people. But maybe Julie might also have another comment. What are the contrasts we can hope for at low field? Is there any perspective for new contrasts?
Well, if you look at the T1 and the T2, they change ever so slightly, but I don't think that this opens a door for a really new contrast. Then the fat water contrast is going to be very difficult to address, right? Because they are so close to one another, and that might actually be interesting for you and your team, you know, to wrap your mind around this additional challenge, right? But personally, I do not expect new contrasts. Neither have I seen anything in the literature that pointed in that direction. But maybe I just don't see the full picture.
It's maybe not new contrast, but I mean, our hope is that the having less banding artifact, we can use, or we have less strict requirements on the TR for BSSFP. So every time this question comes up, I say BSSFP flow. That's not a new contrast, and it's an idea that exists at 1.5. But I think there's already work showing that at 0.55. And yeah, so then you take 2 of your sequences are now 1 sequence, which is awesome in a cardiac exam. So.
Yeah, maybe I take back what I just said. If you look at the outside the heart, if you look at the lung images people from the NIH show, I mean, this is going to be a game changer for pediatric patients with cystic fibrosis, right? Because these patients now live into their adulthood, which they didn't 10 years ago, which means they are followed up, I think, twice a year with CT to look at their lungs. Now, of course, the CT radiation doses are going down and down, we know that, but on the other hand, now they are getting older, and it's just, we know that the effect is cumulative, right, of the radiation. So if you could replace every other CT, perhaps with an MR that has enough contrast to look at air trapping and other things that are important in cystic fibrosis, then we have a winner. And if you look at the images from Adrienne of the lungs, it's just spectacular how the lung parenchyma actually lights up on these images. You never see that at 1.5T or 3T.
I'd like to jump in on what Julie said, because we've been talking about clinical diagnosis so far, but there's something Julie is doing as well, and correct me if I'm wrong, Julie. Sometimes we receive ex vivo heart from people who died, for example, who died from sudden cardiac death, and where the family doesn't have an answer to what happened to this child. And I remember recently, Julie, you managed to run your new sequences with very, very high resolution that we cannot get with a clinical MRI. And you were able to give an answer on this child who died from sudden cardiac death. And I think from what I remember, it was a small scar, or was it a small fat infiltration that you detected? And so you provided this answer to the family. And this is game changing for the family, right?
Yeah, exactly. So we were able to identify a fat infiltration with fibrosis inside the cardiac muscles. And we were able to give an answer and also to prevent the family and to tell them you have to be careful, just pass a MR exam or cardiac exam for the sister, for instance, or the family. Yes, it's another application on very high field MRI sometimes to have insert with playing with high resolution. It's another aspect of very high resolution MRI imaging. It's very, very interesting. But what we can develop at very high field, it will give you answer very easily with the resolution, with the contrast, etc. But it could be also very interesting and challenging to put this development at lower field and then to try on in vivo this kind of sequencing. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, that's fascinating. Thanks for sharing that really with us, because I think, most of us are working in human systems, right? We look at human hearts of people that are usually still alive, luckily. But of course, there is a whole other spectrum of high-end research going on high field systems, also cardiovascular, particularly I believe, where research questions outside of living organism are, of course, of critical importance as well.
Yes, and then we confirm this aspect by histology, etc. But to have an answer on the whole 3D human heart is very interesting for the clinical aspect and for the family. Yes, it's a good point. Thank you, Aurélien.
And particularly for this disease that you detected, right? Was it ARVC?
Yeah, it was the beginning of ARVC, and then we have to tell the family and try to prevent. Yeah.
So there is a huge impact at the end for the entire family.
True.
Julie, how would you translate that? I mean, there are athletes who die from sudden death because of ARVD, right? And there are also fatty infiltrations. And as you just mentioned, you saw that thanks to this high field strength. So what would we need to do in these athletes who are still alive, to make sure they don't have any of this?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. Yeah, it's question. Yeah. Yes, I don't know. In routine, we don't have access to fibrosis and fat infiltration for now, so it's quite difficult because the resolution, the acquisition time also, it's difficult, and sometimes we don't have the information on fat in real time, so we have to post-process also. So yeah, for the routine MRI, it would be very difficult for now, but we will see.
So you're studying ex vivo hearts, is that correct? Are you considering also looking at perfused ex vivo hearts? So
I already perform experiment on a very difficult system inside the magnet with perfusion of in the Langendorf perfusion. So you have the heart is beating, but it's not the real beating of the heart. And then you can put electrode, you can trigger, and you can acquire high resolution images with this system on ex vivo heart. Yes, I've already done this with Fanny Vaillant, a researcher in the lab. We develop all the system MR compatible at 1.5, but also at 9.4 Tesla, yes.
That would be very interesting for looking at, for example, the grafts, the people that receive transplant.
Yeah, and we can push the heart, inject drugs. So in fundamental aspect, we can push the limit of different art with pathological art or not. And then it's very, very interesting, yeah.
Nice.
Well, actually, what you just say, you know, that's a totally new insight, right? There is something in these hearts which was previously invisible to us, right? We were just, our MR lens, if you will, was just not strong enough to pick this up. And you have a lens that can pick it up now. That should motivate everybody downstreams, you know, at lower field strength, to come up with new ideas. How could these isolated islands that have a different property still be identified, you know, with lower field strengths, right? So that walkie-talkie humans can benefit from it as well. Maybe it's spectroscopy, you know, maybe it's something else, I don't know. Maybe it's MTC, maybe it's diffusion. Who knows?
Yeah. I played with my phosphorus coil with this setup, and I put in the right ventricle, in the left ventricle during the beating aspect, and then we are trying to perform spectroscopy, yeah, and to push the heart and to see the failure of the phosphocreatine, etc. So yeah, it's very interesting.
I had a question for the Lagendorf. Is it a systemic pressure, or do you have flow inside the valve?
Yeah, I have flow. It's a retrograde. I'm not an expert of all the setup because it's quite complicated, but we have also a lot of play with the pressure inside the heart, but it's not the beating heart, it's a Langendorf mode. It's more simple to work with this mode, but the next step will be with the full beating heart, but it's more complicated. Yeah.
You have to diffuse the coronaries, and do you use that as well, or you will do next time?
I'm sorry, I didn't.
Perfuse the coronaries, that's the question. Are you perfusing the coronaries?
No.
Because I tried to do this back in Canada, and they told me it's very complicated to do a full ex vivo Lagendorf heart.
Yeah.
And you need very expensive drugs to.
Yes, it's very expensive. Yeah.
Preserve, it's about $5,000 or $10,000.
Yeah.
Experiments and
it depends of the species also. Sometimes it works very well on pig heart, but not on sheep heart. Yeah.
Sometimes it's better to just keep the heart inside the body and then just do the experiment directly inside, rather than using the drugs itself. It's cheaper.
Yeah. Yes, we recover all the blood. Sometimes the blood of 2 animals. And there is a specific solution with the blood animals and heparin and a lot of stuff. I'm not an expert, so I will not go further on the details. But yes, it works better with the blood. Yeah.
8 to 10 liters of blood.
Sorry?
8 to 10 liters of blood.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
You better not spill it.
It's not a beautiful experiment. Huh? It's not very beautiful. Yeah.
And for instance, I am thinking of the benefits of high field while still not being able to put a person inside, for instance, in 7 Tesla, or in cases where they're already building high field scanners for humans. Do you think this type of applications of finding the infiltrations at very high resolutions could be an application there for actual living people?
Yeah, because there are different diseases with fat infiltration, and especially electrical disorder disease like ARVC, arrhythmogenic right ventricular disease. And also it can. The problem with the fat infiltration is that it transforms in fibrosis, and there is a death of muscles of ventricular muscles. So you have a decrease of your functional, of your cardiac function. So yeah, if you detect very early the problem, I don't know all the clinical intervention to counteract the disease, but if you if it early is better with this kind of disease, especially with fat infiltration, because if it transforms in fibrosis, it will be irreversible. So yeah.
And so you think that, like, for instance, is a future for eye field, this like very, very high resolution that you are able to achieve in such small structures, because like the 9.4 scanner is also a very small bore, right? So it's a very homogeneous field. Do you think it's actually possible to reach that type of high resolution with
for now
human scanners?
It's very difficult with the coil available to obtain this kind of resolution. But maybe in the future we can have coil very flexible. We can insert coil inside the heart, but it's a dream. But maybe we can have access of this kind of coil and this kind of design, and to be able to have information, very high resolution information inside the heart, and to be able to localize very precisely this kind of fat infiltration. But we are not, it's a dream for now, but maybe one day, yeah.
Are there any questions?
I think I'm just gonna add a comment. I would really invite everyone to read Julie's paper, particularly the last two ones that have been published in Nature and in Magma, where she is using MTC and diffusion at high field. Please have a look. These are really impressive papers. Thanks, Julie, for jumping in. Any other questions?
I plan to have a low field in France.
We are not, as far
we
as
have
I
3
know.
Tesla.
Very good.
I haven't heard of any center that are considering this. Not yet. Could be interesting, but it needs a lot of people to agree and sign papers.
So Julie, you are welcome to come to Lausanne to work on the low field system.
Okay.
All right. We've been talking a lot about resolutions, so it's a good transition for the next journal club. Thanks again to Stan and Matthias and Ludovica. That was a beautiful session and a beautiful discussion. And I'm very much looking forward to seeing you all next month, November 18th, for this nice session with two great speakers, Salim and Rick. They're gonna talk about the new photon counting city and the good old micro city. So very interesting topic again. But from now, I think that's all. Thanks again. Have a nice day, have a nice weekend, and take care, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you.